Welcome to Taller Together, the podcast where we explore how creative and cultural work is shaped behind the scenes and over time. Today we're talking about something cultural organizations rely on every single day but rarely stop to interrogate: the software that underpins trust. Museums and collections are deeply experienced custodians of physical objects, but increasingly, what protects, documents, and even tracks those objects often lives in software, not just collection records and provenance data, but security systems that monitor the location, movement, and status of artworks as they travel, are stored, or go on display. These systems, whether they're managing catalogs, digital archives, or real-time safeguarding and tracking, are mission critical. And yet, they often sit inside platforms that institutions don't own and can't fully inspect. What happens if that software disappears, or if the vendor behind a collection system or a security and tracking system suddenly goes quiet? That's what we're unpacking today through the lens of software escrow, not as a technical checkbox, but as a form of digital custody and cultural stewardship. I'm joined by two guests who look at this challenge from very different but deeply connected angles. Guy Krige is a legal expert specializing in escrow, IP licensing, and enforceable continuity frameworks. And Anthony Watson is the CEO of EscrowSure, a neutral software escrow provider who works directly with institutions facing real-world digital risk. Welcome, Guy and Anthony. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today.
Great, Tamzin. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Tamzin. Great to be here.
Before we dive in, I want to ground this in something I see constantly in my own work. At Artfundi, we work with museums and collections that are actively trying to modernize. They want better visibility, better workflows, better security. But as soon as trustees, procurement, or legal teams get involved, the same question always comes up. What happens if the system goes down or we lose access to the software? Having a good, clear answer is literally the difference between doing business with them or not. Anthony, you've seen what happens when that question hasn't been asked early enough. Can you share one of those moments?
Yes, certainly. And unfortunately, it's not a rare scenario. I worked with a mid-sized medium museum that had spent over a decade building a digital catalog. Their provenance records, conservation notes, donor restrictions, internal curatorial commentary, the lot, it was all stored. And it wasn't just a database, it was the living memory of the institution itself. But then the vendor folded without giving any notice, and there were no usable backups, no access to the source code. So overnight, the staff was locked out. At first, everyone thought it was temporary, but then when weeks went by, curators were using spreadsheets, registrars were digging out of paper files, and the conservation work was stalled. And the real damage wasn't just operational, but it was trust. Trustees, funders, lending partners all started asking how something so fundamental had no safety net. And that's when it became clear, Tamzin, this wasn't an IT failure, it was a governance failure.
That's the part that really resonates with me, because when those systems go down, people don't say, oh, well, that was just software, They say, how could you have let this happen?
Exactly. And that's why this changed how I think about escrow. Escrow isn't just about recovering code. It's about safeguarding the systems that protect knowledge, accountability, and physical assets. Just as we ensure artworks, maintain climate control, and train conservators, we also need to ensure that the digital systems tracking and protecting collections don't vanish overnight. When escrow is in place, it sits quietly in the background. But when it's not, and something goes wrong, you realize it was the only thing standing between an organization and a complete loss of control.
That's everyone's worst nightmare, that complete loss of control. Guy, when people hear software escrow, they often imagine something abstract or overly legal, or that maybe you never even heard the term before. So in practice, can you share with us what problem is it actually solving?
Thanks, Tamzin. It's true. People very rarely deal with software escrow. We deal with escrow in various financial areas of our lives, but in terms of software, it's quite rare. And so at its core, escrow exists to translate risk into rights. So institutions face very specific risks concerning their software suppliers or vendors. Perhaps a vendor might go insolvent or become acquired by a competitor. There could be a service delivery collapse, or perhaps they just don't answer the phone. Without escrow, those risks remain theoretical until they become operational realities and a crisis ensues. So a well-structured escrow agreement does three critical things. Number one, it defines clear trigger events, not vague promises. Number two, it establishes a pre-agreed fallback license, so there's no IP panic during the crisis. And number three, it creates a fast, enforceable, demonstrable release path that doesn't depend on vendor goodwill. We've seen cases where vendors simply went silent, no termination notice, no handover, just gone. Institutions without escrow had no leverage. Institutions with escrow regained control within days.
That word leverage really matters because it isn't about mistrust. And I think that's where the tension around escrow often comes up when it's initially mentioned. And usually that's from the company side, and it's usually in relation to an innovation company or a startup. And they feel, oh, you don't trust us. But it's not about that. It's about governance. From the SaaS provider side, as one, ourselves, I want to say this clearly. Escrow doesn't weaken trust. It strengthens it. We once worked with a corporate collection that had been burned before. Their previous vendor shut down during the pandemic and they lost years of records. So when they shortlisted Artfundi, the board hesitated, not because of our functionality, but because of the risk of us being a single point of failure. And then when we introduced escrow, it changed the entire tone of that conversation. Once they understood that our source code, documentation, deployment instructions, and all the systems underpinning the security and tracking functionality would be held by an independent third party and regularly verified, then procurement relaxed and legal signed off, and the board approved the project. So for us, escrow reframed us from a risk into a continuity partner. Anthony, some listeners might be thinking, so having the code doesn't automatically mean you can run the system. Can you talk a bit about that?
Of course, Tamzin, and I just want to congratulate you for closing that deal.
Thank you.
We've seen organizations receive source code as a goodwill gesture, only to discover that it's unusable. So with those missing dependencies, undocumented build steps, deprecated APIs, the credentials stored somewhere that nobody remembers, it's useless. And that's why verification is essential. Escrow has to include dependencies, infrastructure details, build instructions, credentials handling, and regular retesting. Otherwise, it's just shelfware.
I remember, since Artfundi has done this whole exercise with you, I can comment on our first-hand experience rebuilding a mirror instance of Artfundi for escrow. My first fear, in a way, was that your independent verifier would literally watch us do it and record it. It was like, oh, and I expected it to be onerous, and it was surprisingly less onerous than expected. EscrowSure held our hand every step of the way. And yet, we still uncovered gaps that we didn't even know existed. And fixing those gaps made us better technologists and more trustworthy partners. So the exercise was beneficial for us as a vendor. And now we do it as a matter of course for our enterprise clients. And I think that's important because some vendors are so scared of it and hesitant to do it that they actually let the deals go rather than embrace what escrow can mean for them as well as the company that they want to do business with.
100%. It's that value add, that ticket to the big game that they don't know they already need.
Absolutely. And Guy, from your perspective, how does escrow land at a board or audit level?
Thanks, Tamzin. Yeah, it lands positively, and that's because the board carries ultimate responsibility for the continuity of the business. So board members can actually be held personally responsible in the event that things go wrong. And so they're very keen to implement the latest governance techniques and conform to the latest regulations And so escrow supports governance frameworks like ISO 27000 and emerging digital standards that we have in our country, the joint standards. There are a couple of them that inform boards and auditors and funders who require tangible evidence that continuity is not just theoretical, it's demonstrable. So executives don't want technical detail. What they want is the assurance that they can defend. We have covered ourselves, and escrow provides that assurance.
They do get access to see and to verify themselves that the source code has been secured. It can be run, it can be operated.
Correct. They will receive a report which demonstrates the process of verifying that the software is what it purports to be. But unless or until there is a release, they will never have access to the actual intellectual property. And that's to protect the IP owner, which in your case is you.
Yes. Anthony, looking 5 years ahead, what risks do you think institutions are still underestimating?
Thanks, Tamzin. That's a really interesting insight. We have to look into that crystal ball. And I think it's the illusion of the stability of these institutions. And just because the software runs in the cloud, it doesn't mean that they're going to be safe. Software vendors, they pivot, they get acquired or shut down faster than ever. And especially with the buzzword AI, it's accelerating change. So for collections, that creates a new fragility. You could lose access to decades of cataloging data, real-time tracking and security systems, but not because of a cybersecurity breach, but because the vendor quietly exits. It's a risk that is often missed. So escrow is the practical backstop, and it turns digital trust from assumption into action. So if you claim to be a long-term custodian of culture, you have to protect the systems that hold and safeguard its memory.
And I'm so glad that more organizations are realizing this, because we've noticed where in the past we would mention source code escrow and some would say they haven't heard of it, or sometimes they wouldn't say, they would just later reveal they had to Google it after I'd left the meeting. But we've also recently been asked up front, do you offer source code escrow? So it's great to be able to answer, yes, we do. And we've done it before, and these are our partners, and this is how it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming internationally well recognized. It's incredible to see that, when you travel as far as Asia or Europe, that escrow becomes part of those board discussions. Being able to execute it the right way, that's when it comes to what service can you expect from an escrow service provider like EscrowSure. I think that the next 5 years, definitely escrow will become the new buzzword rather than just AI.
In total, what security by design means, it's all in the headlines and on the news when somebody breaks into a museum and steals the crown jewels. But when the museum themselves loses their data, it's an internal panic and scramble, and they do everything in their power not to let that come out into the public. It's absolute pandemonium. So I'm glad that my industry is realizing that pain can be mitigated up front. They can have the reassurance that they are covered. That frees them up to work with more interesting, more modern, and more innovative vendors, and not to feel stuck with old legacy systems that aren't serving them for the work that they need to do now. So it's a delight to have this conversation with you and to be able to share that with the listeners.
I'm just thinking, when Guy and I sat together and we thought, what slogan can one associate with the word software escrow? And it was operational resilience by design. And what that encompasses is that you're looking at a proactive approach to mitigating risk rather than a reactive approach.
And that is good for both parties, even the vendor, the software supplier. So I think that feels like a good place to close. And we always end all it together with the same quick fire questions, short answers, first thing that comes to mind. I'd love to hear each of you take a turn on these. A book on creativity or leadership that you return to, and why?
Have discovered after many years that I'm much more an oral learner than I am a reader. And I've become absolutely addicted to a podcast on YouTube called Diary of a CEO.
Oh, me too.
Stephen Bartlett seems to be able to attract the experts in any given field, and I just can't get enough of it. In fact, he produces the podcasts faster than I can consume them.
It's brilliant. And Anthony?
I mean, thinking about this, it's also how we applied it to our business, but it's Start With the Why by Simon Sinek, because it shows that lasting creativity and leadership just comes from purpose and not product. People buy not what you do, but why you do it. So, he's saying that the leaders that have the greatest influence in the world all think, act, and communicate the same way. So why reinvent the wheel?
Absolutely. It's so important, knowing, connecting with your why and being able to communicate. I feel sorry for people who haven't found it yet and they're kind of miserable in their work because they don't have a purpose for doing it. What's the best advice you've ever received?
I was mulling this one over, and I actually think it's the most profoundly simple, practical piece of advice, and that is to pause and breathe. In younger days, I might have been quick to say, respond, give some kind of answer. You operate from a different part of your brain when you're too fast. You operate with your limbic brain, your lizard brain. But if you pause and breathe, your brain transitions to a much more rational, logical area, and you're likely to provide a better response.
I like that one. I don't do it often enough. You find yourself holding your breath, and then comes the end of the day and you've held it all day. What advice have you received, Anthony?
It's interesting that Guy talks about breathing because it correlates a little bit with what advice I have here. And it's actually on the front of a book cover called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. It's a book written by Richard Colson, and brilliant. Unfortunately, he's moved on. But it reveals ways to calm down incredibly hurried, stress-filled life, so you can learn to put things in perspective by making small daily changes. And I'm sure breathing is definitely still there. I still have to read that chapter.
They both kind of fit in with those interviews you see them doing with 100-year-old or 90-something-year-olds who look back and give advice on what they've learned from life. And it's usually don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
Isn't that such a valuable resource to be able to go to those folks who've walked the road and made the mistakes or had the successes, and to draw from their experience? I love that.
And isn't it sad how much we as a culture tend to shut them out when they get past a certain age?
Exactly. In a family, a multi-generational family, that would just be happening naturally around the dining table. Whereas we have to have podcasts in order to extract that information.
And that lucky world we're living in, right?
Yes.
Our culture, isn't it? It's our culture says this is my house and that's your house, and we'll just visit you now and again, instead of we're all together, around one table.
And one piece of advice you'd give your 20-year-old self?
Stop being so serious. When I was in my 20s, I was studying my LLB, and I was very focused on, getting qualified and then getting out and working. And if I had any idea of the treadmill that I was about to step onto, well, now looking back, I would say, don't get on that treadmill. Go and be a ski instructor. Go and ride a bike around the world. Go and sail on a yacht. Go and just stop taking yourself so seriously.
I think I got the same out of my ideas here, but I also think, you have to travel whenever you can. And now that I'm a father with a 6-month-old, I feel that traveling is limited. So when you're young and you can make mistakes and you can be adventurous and you can go and work on a yacht, or you can, take those risks, that's where there's definitely a lot of valuable lessons to be learned before you become that old, wise 106-year-old talking on podcasts. I think it's so important that you keep your family close as well, because, you must cherish those moments with them. And when you are young, you're so easy to push them away because you think you know better. You don't. You don't have all the answers. So, it's like I'm speaking from experience here. But as we keep on going, I think who we are today is definitely shaped by the decisions that we did make when we were 20 years old back in the day. But yeah.
Absolutely. At 20, we always think that we've got so much time for everything. And the time goes so quickly. It's frightening. Guy, if you were an artwork, what would you be and why?
Oh, Tamzin, I've dreaded this question.
Come on, you can do it.
Because I'm not familiar with enough artworks, and I certainly can't see myself as an artwork. When I first saw the question, I imagined one of those incredible marble carvings from Greek antiquity, and I thought, no, I certainly cannot possibly say that I would like to be one of those. But I'd like to say a little bit about some artwork that I saw in person, which really impacted me. Ant and I traveled to Paris in the Q3 last year. Our business was acquired by a French company, and we went to meet the rest of the team. I was able to see in person some Monets, which I'm very, very fond of. And my wife was with me, and she studied art at school and went on to study architecture. She was very keen on seeing Monet, and we saw Monets in 3 different locations. But my favorite were the huge canvases in the Orangery Museum at the bottom of the Tuileries Gardens. And I just sat mesmerized looking at these 12-foot wide, 6-foot high canvases of Monet's water lilies.
Aren't they magic?
And it was just mesmerizing. They're just magical. And then my favorite part of it all, because I love the story behind something. And there was a very brief story about Claude Monet himself, and a photograph of him standing on the bridge across his little pond. And I learned something about him and how he had lived, his wife and family. And I just adored that. I'd be a canvas of a tranquil pond with Monet's lilies on it,
in front of which people can breathe.
Yeah, perfect.
I want to go there right now.
Tamzin, I do think we should be asking these questions of you. I'd love to hear your answers to these questions. And I don't know when the podcast is going to give those. But anyway, let's subject Anthony to being an artwork first before we go.
Subject Anthony, yes.
No, I've decided I'm not going to go anymore after that. Wow. No, I mean, on my side, we've got a Gail Catlin hanging at home.
Oh.
And it's really, really special that I'm still holding on to that Gail Catlin. It's cows in a pasture. And I mean, I'm mesmerized by her liquid crystal work, where you can actually view it from different sides and you can feel different emotion when you are looking at it in summer or winter, etc. We went to Sotheby's and wanted to know what's this Gail Catlin actually worth. And when we went through all of those motions and we realized, no, it's actually priceless. Don't ship it, keep it, preserve it. That was passed on to me by my late mother. So for me, being able to just identify that there's always going to be those different viewing angles of who you are as a person in your life. And that's what Gail Catlin has made me realize.
Wonderful.
And yourself, Tamzin?
It's a super interesting question. Oh, you've turned it on me. I find the answer changes from time to time. But right now, I would be an Augustine Coffey. He is an artist from Los Angeles. Started out as a street artist with spray cans on the sides of buildings and is now an artist that hangs in galleries. His works are big and bold and quite architectural, but also a little retro. So have a feeling about them, an imperfect feeling, but also it's kind of a crossover between retro and futuristic. So I think that's a little bit of me, a little bit sentimental, but very interested in the future as well.
I love that.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this intriguing and fascinating conversation. And for me, it's a conversation that isn't about fear. It's about care for data, care for artworks, care for the people responsible for them. So thank you so much for this thoughtful and grounded discussion. And thank you for listening to Taller Together. If it sparked questions or reflections, we'd love to hear from you.